Welcome everyone to another episode of Runners Roundtable. We're in season 3. It's all the how-tos. And today I am talking with the incredible coach, Becky Croft, about menopause. Now, I'm going to start off by saying that I thought menopause was just a one and done type of thing. Like one day is menopause and then you're over it. And it wasn't until I took Dr. Stacy Sims, she had a Menopause for Athletes course, that I realized, oh, it's actually a process. Like it's not from one day to the next type of thing. And it just blew my mind away. And also made me realize I am a far more complicated species and being than I thought I was. So before we really get into that, because I'm sure there's a lot of people that are like, wait, menopause isn't just one day, or it isn't just like a tiny little phase and then you're done. How about you tell us, reintroduce us runners, because we have heard from you before in season 2, but reintroduce us to yourself and how you got connected to menopause. And it's such a passion of yours, truly. I feel like I see all your posts. If you aren't following her, coach.croft on Instagram, you need to follow her because there is such a wealth of information. And I feel like it's so bizarre to me to exist in a female body and not really know what happens with the female body. So I'm going to throw it to you now. Tell us about yourself and how menopause came to be something that you're incredibly passionate about teaching everyone about.
Absolutely. So my name is Becky Croft, and I am a certified RRCA run coach and Chi running instructor in Oklahoma. Like you said, menopause is something that we don't really put a lot of thought into, and it's not something that it was not on my radar. I was never taught about menopause. I pretty much just picked up some tidbits here and there, like everybody else does. Like we think it just happens at 50. Like we wake up on our 50th birthday and welcome to menopause. Like you've arrived. And yeah, you're going to have some hot flashes and some night sweats, and you're going to be a little moody and maybe have some brain fog, and then like it's done, right? But for me, I entered it temporarily at 37, which was chemically induced, and because I had endometriosis. And then I opted for a full hysterectomy at the age of 38. And though I had a brief window of dealing with it in surgical or in temporary menopause, it wasn't the same. And there really weren't any resources for me. This was 7 years ago. So Stacy Sims was not on my radar at that point. And I love her information, but it doesn't pertain to me. So me being a younger athlete in surgical menopause, I didn't feel like I had any resources. And I got so frustrated with endless Google search after another that I finally just started speaking up about my experience, because I felt like, I've said this many times, I felt like a unicorn, but not in some like sparkly magical way. I felt like I was alone on this little bitty island with nobody to relate to. So I finally kind of just gave in and got vulnerable and started speaking about my experience and learning even more about menopause through my own experiences on my own.
Which is amazing to me, right? And that's why I say it baffles me to live my life in a female body and so much emphasis be placed on our menstruating years, right? Like there's so much emphasis on being young, and I feel like there's nothing. And as you know, for myself, as I get older, I know that menopause is in my future. That is something that I'm going to go through. And yet the resources for it, I don't know. I feel like there's maybe still this stigma around it. What are your thoughts on that?
I agree. I think that there's a lot of myths that we still need to debunk on this. And this is why I'm so excited that you're doing this series, because as you know, I do speak to this a lot, and I kind of have a little bit of a different mindset around it. Like, yeah, you're probably going to deal with some of the typical symptoms, but there's a lot of symptoms. There's hundreds of them, and they're not being spoken about. So I think it's really important that we start expanding these conversations and going, hey, no, you're not crazy. You're just in menopause or you're nearing menopause.
So what are some of the symptoms? Because I feel like the big ones are your heat flashes, weight gain, and brain fog. At least those are the ones that I hear about a lot. And I know for me, again, after I took the course by Dr. Stacy Sims, I got off that course and I went to my husband and I apologized to him. And I'm like, you know what? I'm sorry in advance for what you need to put up with, because I didn't realize how it affects us mentally, like beyond brain fog. I mean, they gave examples of people who thought they were, and I'm not going to use proper terminology here, so please correct me, but people who thought they were having like breakdowns, like mental breakdowns, and it was really just the hormones and how it was affecting them mentally. So what are some of the other symptoms that we don't hear about? Because I mean, and I'm also going to throw this out there, right? We live in a society where women's symptoms are diminished, right?
Yeah.
Like where we are dismissed, where our pain, and forget it, if we're talking about something that's happening in our brain, there's even more dismissiveness that comes with that. So for the women who listen to this episode, and even again for myself, what are some of the other things that I can kind of keep an eye out so that I know, like, oh wait, I'm not losing my mind. It's actually my hormones, and maybe now is a good time for me to go get my hormone levels checked out and see where I am. Is that, I guess, what are some of the other symptoms?
So I think that like anxiety and depression are high on that list of very common symptoms, and women are probably more prone to go, okay, yeah, I'm struggling with this, but is it this world we live in? Is it social media? Is it my life? Is it, my work stress? Or is it menopause? Like, our hormones control so many things in our bodies. Like, we don't even understand the importance of them or what they're regulating. And I like to play this game of, is it life or is it high estrogen? Is it low testosterone? Is it high progesterone? Because for me, being in surgical, I'm on all three, and I need all three of them to be in harmony with each other so that I feel like a human being and not like I'm swimming in a dumpster fire. So the cognitive issues that we face, maybe you can't force yourself to be motivated to get up and go on your run because your estrogen balances are out of whack. And this is something that was really eye-opening for me. I listened to the Hit Play Not Pause podcast, which is heavily focused on Stacy Sims and her research. And there was one episode where they talked about like your lack of mojo. And I'm like, oh my God, that's it. Like, I'm really struggling. I have run marathon after marathon, and I can't get out the door for a 3-mile easy run where I give myself permission to just go for 5 minutes and come home if I'm not feeling it, but I can't even get myself out the door. And then I beat myself up all day because I couldn't get out the door by 8 a.m. or 9 a.m. And here it is like 5 p.m. And I want to do my run, but I can't force myself to go. And this loss of mojo, if you will, is such a big barrier in menopause. Like, all the things that we've always loved, and we can't force ourselves to get out the door and go do them. And I had this light bulb moment listening to the podcast where I was like, thank God it's not just me. Like, I'm not just struggling with this on my own. It's not just depression. Like, there's something I can't get to. And so it was perfectly timed because I listened to this and they brought up like low E2. And I went to my hormone doctor, and he had happened to do a saliva test instead of a blood test. And it showed my hormones differently. And where he saw that my estrogen was okay on the blood test, it was super low on the saliva test. And I like almost stood up and screamed in his office, oh my God, there it is.
Okay, so hold on, because we're gonna have to go back. But again, for me, you can check your hormones through blood and saliva.
Yes. And that was not something that I even understood. Like, you're going to hear the hormone doctors say, we don't do blood tests for hormones because they fluctuate so much. And I understand that. I mean, our heart rate fluctuates minute by minute, but they're still checking it, but they want to dismiss the blood test. Now, I think the value is looking at your trends and combining them with your symptoms. And that's what I love about my doctor. I walk in and we go over everything, but he's like, how are you doing? What's going on? What are you struggling with? And if I say I'm feeling good and these levels are low or high, he's like, okay, then I'm not super worried about what the test says. I'm worried about what you're telling me, how you're feeling, how you're functioning every day.
I love that because it's so important to have good care professionals in your corner, right? So I a similar but different experience is I've had issues with my thyroid and I have trended very low on one of the things. And I went to go see an endocrinologist, and the endocrinologist was like, oh no, but it's still within the normal range. It's just low. And I was like, okay, but if it's a trend, right? Like if it's a trend, and if I'm telling you that for me, one of the bigger indications of that is brain fog. I get such horrible brain fog, and I can manage it if I'm eating well and if I'm hydrated, like things like that.
Yeah.
But at the same time, it's like, wait, sometimes you just need someone to validate that there is something going on, and what you are describing paints a different picture than just black and white numbers on the blood work. And sure enough, I went to the endocrinologist. She ordered more blood work. And she's like, no, I think you're fine. And then when it came back and it was still low, so she was like, well, I think now you need to go 6 months from now, get more blood work done and see. And it's because there is that pattern. And to me, it just baffles me sometimes when you go to a doctor and you tell them, this is what I'm feeling. This is not normal for me. This does not feel good. Like, and I mean, for me as a yoga instructor, I always tell people, I'm like, you best. So let's honor that. And I just find it so frustrating when you go to medical professionals or different care professionals and you're like, yes, but this is what I'm feeling. And there is some resistance to acknowledging that or to treating what you're saying you're feeling. So I wanted to point that out because I think it's so great that you have someone that does take the time to talk to you, that does try to understand you as a person, so that for anyone who's listening, go find yourself someone who's like that. If you go, sometimes it takes a few doctors in order to get through that, or a few care professionals or holistic, however it is that you search for it. I wanted to backtrack because I realized I didn't ask you probably the most important question of what is menopause?
Okay, so the way that I would like
loaded question.
It is. The way that I would like to explain it, or my opinion on it, is that it's a huge dumpster fire that nobody properly prepares you for. And it's funny because I remember being in maybe 5th grade or something and sitting in one of my classes and they showed us the video all about sex and the kind of the basics of what we needed to understand, but they kind of prepared us. I knew that I was going to have a period. I knew what it meant. I knew how to prevent babies, but I didn't know how to prepare for menopause. And that was even going through it temporarily. And I had a taste of it. So I kind of knew what I was in for, but I didn't really know what I was in for. So technically what it is that it's the end of your reproductive years. And for most women, that comes in like this middle stage of life. But here again, with the myth around age, and I like to remove age from menopause. That's why I coach masters and menopausal athletes, because it's not one stage. Masters running has a very definite beginning of age, and menopause doesn't. So there's women like me out there that are going through medical menopause, surgical menopause, or even premature menopause, which starts super early, maybe in your 20s, maybe in your 30s. So the myth is that like you wake up on your 50th birthday and you're there, you've arrived. But it doesn't have a clear beginning. And that's one of the things that women really struggle with. Like, am I in menopause? Because they'll go to their doctor and their doctor's like, well, it doesn't happen until 50. So we're not even going to have that conversation. Even though you're going in there with a list of symptoms that are very clearly perimenopausal symptoms. Your doctor's like, no, you're too young. And I've had a doctor laugh at me. I went in for something totally unrelated. It was like a little bump, and I'm like, this is not going away. Like, could you check it and make sure that I'm okay? And he asked me when my last period was. And I'm like, this has nothing to do with this little bump on my arm. But it was in 2016. I said, I'm menopausal. And he laughed at me. He goes, what makes you think that? And I said, well, the hysterectomy I had is a pretty clear indicator. And he was like, oh, he's like, well, you're so young. And I said, yeah, I know, but I'm in menopause. So we've got to remove the age from it, first of all, but it can start super early and your symptoms can last 10 to 15 years.
That was the thing that struck me the most, where I didn't even know there was a thing called perimenopause. Like, I had no clue. Again, I didn't know anything. I thought I come back to the point of it feeling so ridiculous because I am in a female body. You would think that I would know this. Like, I thought I would know this. I don't even know. It's funny because you think of it as something that is a part of the life cycle, right? Like, at some point, every woman is going to go through some kind of menopause, right?
Yes.
And it's not as smooth of a transition as, oh, you got your period and hey, yay, reproductive years. Here, it's a totally different story. We don't talk about it. So when I found out about perimenopause, which is that time period before menopause, I was shocked. Had no clue that we're talking about possibly 10 years. And during that time, and correct me if I'm wrong in my understanding, during that time, you do experience the heat flashes, whatever cognitive symptoms, the weight gain, the all of that. I was just like, no, are you kidding me? You're going to tell me that for possibly 10 years of my life, I'm going to be really confused about what's happening in my body and what's happening in my brain. I had no clue that was part of it. And I feel like also when I learned about my hormones, I felt like the focus was very much so on estrogen. And I didn't understand that what are the hormones that come into play for us women, especially with menopause?
Yeah. So there's three of them: estrogen, testosterone, and progesterone. And there's a misconception that women don't need testosterone, which is untrue. This is where symptoms like low libido kind of become a problem, and testosterone helps with that. Estrogen does not.
Interesting. Okay. Yeah. Okay. I did not know that. That's really interesting because I feel like, again, I just laugh because it all feels so silly to me, right? Because we think that, oh, to be women, it's very feminine and it's the estrogen. And it's like, no, we're a little bit of it all. And we kind of need it all. So when it comes to, and I'm going to ask this and we'll see kind of where it goes, because I feel like there's a lot of information now on how to train as a menstruating person. Like, I've seen all the time where people are like, oh yes, this is the ideal time to have a race when you're in this phase, in this phase. And yet I'm not really seeing anything as to if you're menopausal or if you're in that perimenopause or, like all that stuff sounds really nice when you are 28 day cycle and everything's really regular.
Yes.
So how do you come to understand that with the athletes that you train, and even just for all us women that are listening, knowing that, okay, we've got a long road ahead of ourselves. How do we get empowered by our training, even as our hormones are starting to shift and change in a way that's not, the typical, like, you're not, I guess for me, it's like my body, I know, isn't processing things or doing things like it was when I was 20 years old. Right now, it's, we're talking about, I'm 39, and many years later, I can feel the differences in my body of like, oh, that was the other one where I learned about, I'm like, oh, your hair starts to thin. And all of a
Yes.
sudden I was like, wait, what? No. And I mean,
Yeah.
something like that. I've been struggling with that for the past year of, I look at my daughter's hair and I'm like, I remember when I had such thick, lush hair. Now it's like, it's just,
I was actually thinking about that when I was getting up and around this morning because my hair has changed dramatically. And now I'm Native American, so I have a lot of hair. I mean, it's down to, as my granddaughter would say, it's down to my booty. But the texture of my hair has changed. And so I always had such like thick hair, like the strands were thick, but I also had a ton of it. And so my mom always struggled with it when I was younger. And I've shaved like the bottom half of it before because it was just so much cooler. But I still have a ton of hair, but the strands are very, very fine now. So these are changes. Now, not every woman is going to have any and all symptoms. I've got one of my athletes who she's adorable. She's my tiny little Energizer bunny. She was like, I'm the athlete that you hate because I didn't have any problems transitioning between the two. And I'm like, you are the worst. But she really didn't. She didn't struggle. No, she probably had some symptoms that she didn't realize were associated, but others of us really fight with it, especially in surgical. And that's why I'm such an advocate for speaking to surgical menopause, because Stacy Sims is one of the few that was really well versed in this, but she's still not speaking to surgical, or when I've spoken about my experiences, they have been dismissed by her. So
oh,
I am cautious about how I take in information because yeah, there's such a large majority of women out there that are in this group of natural menopause that go through the transition, and it's a very long period of time. And then there's people like me who go through it overnight, and the symptoms are tenfold. And so managing them is much harder. Now, the beauty is I don't have a period, so I don't have to worry about cycle tracking with my training, but it can be helpful. It's not the end all be all. I did have a conversation with one of my fellow coaches not too long ago, and she's like, "Oh my gosh, there's this Olympian athlete who's speaking about it," and it was something that she had not heard of, and I'm like, "Yeah, it can be really helpful." But I mean, there's women out there who can train through periods without a problem, and there's some who cannot. We're all very different. We all have very different thresholds. I've had some extremely ridiculous bleeding on race days, and I'm the girl who goes out there and just does it.
right.
But not everybody is that way. So with anything as far as training or menopause is concerned, my biggest piece of advice is to approach it with curiosity.
Mm.
Go out there and experiment. See if maybe training differently will help you. But when it comes to menopause and being in that stage, there are some things that you can do to kind of change up your training. And my favorite phrase is old ways will not open new doors. So this is where I speak to periodizing your training.
Mm-hmm.
Progressive overload, polarizing your training, and understanding that maybe you need to tweak things a little bit. I've learned a lot about that and how it can really benefit training.
I really appreciate that, because that's something that even recently I was talking to some of my friends about, where we, just because it worked once doesn't mean it will always work. So now, just so that we're all really clear on the terms that you're using, what do you mean about periodizing your training? And what do you mean about progressive overload? Like, what do those terms mean for you?
Yeah, so I think that progressive overload is probably more accepted in strength training, like slowly ramping up your training, slowly adding more weight, higher reps, lower weight, higher weight, lower reps, and how to very cautiously ease into that so that you don't go in and injure yourself. But you need to be doing that in your training as well. This is where like that 10% rule comes into your training and adding mileage. You need to slowly ramp up, not go from couch to marathon, not have huge spikes and dips in your training. You need to ramp it up and pull back here and there so that you have more rest. But I think where everybody is really missing the mark is on periodizing your training. Now, for me, I'm going to race this weekend. I'm in a 10K, and then I'm going into a couple of maintenance months. So it's adding more strength. I'm going to pull back in my mileage. I'll still have some short, spicy speed sessions, but I'm capping them at like 3 to 4 miles. So I can get faster and not tax my body as much as when I'm marathoning. For me, I mean, I kind of train like the elites. I'm not elite, but that doesn't mean that I can't train like them. I will do no more than 2 marathons a year because I know that I get sick of running.
Yeah.
If I do a lot of high mileage, and I don't need to do it. Training smarter rather than harder for me means taking a couple months to pull back and, you know, my overall training mileage and intensity and playing and having fun. Lita, she runs this town group. So on Saturdays for the next 2 months, it's whatever the group wants to do. My training has nothing to do with it. We will go out for 3 to 6 miles together easily.
Yeah, and I feel like that's something that we constantly miss, and I'll, shoot in the social media stuff here, because I feel like on social media, at least from what I consume, I try to be really mindful of what I consume, or maybe not so much mindful, just aware of what I consume, because people I follow on social media, I'm like, wait, everybody's always racing, everyone's always training for something, there's always something happening, and what's going on? And yet I know for myself as well that I just came off of the London Marathon, and I took 2 weeks off, which it's okay. I think I would have been happier with like 10 days off. I think 2 weeks was a little too much for me, but now I'm in this in between of just running and kind of getting back into the rhythm and the structure. And then I'll start up marathon training again in July, because I'm signed up for Marine Corps. But I look forward to this period of time where it isn't structured, because for me, that's an opportunity to remember why I love running and to start to miss that work of a marathon training cycle, of the long runs. And I mean, I was someone who, when I first started running, granted, again, I was in my mid-20s, I ran multiple marathons a year. Like I was like, all right, Chicago. And then 4 weeks later, let's do New York City. And there was 1 year where I did Berlin. And then 2 weeks later, it was Chicago. I would never do that again. Not for me, just because I similarly, I burn out when I'm running too much high mileage. Like I can't. I need to build, come down, build, come down, and then take a nice long break.
Yes.
How does that differ? Because I feel like that was something I can do, just from my experience, I could do when I was younger, but now it just doesn't work. I feel like I don't recover and I don't enjoy it. Is that something with aging? Is it just like being a new runner and excited by the sport? Or is there something to our development, whether it be our mental development as athletes or whether it be our life stage? Does menopause play anything into that? Because again, for me, the older I get, I realize, one, I need to spend more time strength training. I can't just get up and run like I used to. It's one of those things where yes, more time has to be pulled back from running because I need to put more time into the strength piece. And I learned this as well recently, where it's like, oh yeah, hey, as a woman, I'm going to start losing muscle at an incredible rate. So I'm curious, how does that all come together, or how do you view all of that?
So my answer is it's all of the above. There's so many different components to our training that we can't do what we once got away with. Like when we are young runners, we are full of hormones that help us, repair very quickly the damage that we've done on the run. So you can go out and run all the miles. As you get older, your personality changes. You've been through life. You kind of get to this place where you're like, I don't have any more F's to give. I'm just going to go do whatever. You start learning and growing and adapting to different ways of doing things that you've always done. Now, this can actually be a strength rather than a weakness. I think that in menopause, we do mourn who we once were and what we could once do. And this is something that I absolutely experienced in surgical menopause. I felt like I was broken. I couldn't create a life inside of my body. And that is something that I wanted. I wanted to be a mom, and I felt very broken. Why are there like these really terrible people out here addicted to drugs, getting pregnant and having babies, and they're in the foster care system when there's people like me who want to be a mom and can't? I'm a stepmom, and that was its own challenge, but I felt very broken, and I was always like, oh, I was better, I was faster, I was happier before, and was this a mistake? But most women don't even get to ask that question of like, is this something I should have done? They get thrown into it regardless. But we can look back on all of our past experiences and see all the happy and the good, and we kind of forget some of the bad. But there are strengths, and there are ways to get better and happier and stronger in menopause as well. You have to tap into those for sure. But yeah, I think it all comes into play. The hormones, how our lives change with work stress and life stress and all of our obligations, it all plays in together.
Yeah. And I really thank you for sharing that, because it's all our experiences are so varied, and I just appreciate it because you never know what a person's story is, right? Like you have no clue what a person's story is and how we get to where we are. And even with all those different experiences, we're talking about menopause, which is something that we cannot escape.
Yeah.
Regardless of whether you were able to have kids or not able to have kids, like menopause is coming for you, right?
It was coming one way or the other.
It was coming one way or the other. And what I appreciate about what you shared too is that there is an element of mourning that we all have to go through when it comes to letting go of our previous selves, letting go of whatever our notions were. And I can imagine that there's this, so it's a two-part question. It's a two-part question, right? I feel like now I'm seeing a lot of faster as a master hashtag stuff. And I'm like, oh, that stuff is really cute. Oh, maybe that's me. But at the same time, I'm like, but maybe that's not me, right? Like maybe I'm someone who will not be faster as a master. And there is some grief in that, but it's also understanding to what you said of like how our priorities change and how our minds change. And for me as a runner, at least where I am today as a runner, I'm not so much concerned about being faster as I am about being stronger. I want to be strong enough to keep running at whatever capacity I want to run. If I could keep running at the capacity that I run today, that would be fabulous. If not, I want to be able to do what my body can do. So how does that, I feel like it's two. It's the faster as a master mentality, but then there's also the, okay, wait, this is actually a period of life where you have to totally redefine, maybe for some people, not everyone, but you might have to redefine what your relationship is to this sport. How do you talk to your athletes about this? How do you encourage them as they're moving through this? Again, like you said, one of your athletes didn't have anything. So it was a great transition. Like it was smooth for them. But for the athletes that are not, because I know, again, for myself, different issue, but the brain fog was so bad for me. I would say probably almost 2 years ago. And I was really upset with myself and kind of just upset with my body because I'm like, why can't I figure it out? Like, and I can only imagine that going forward, at least now I know, right? Like when we're talking about menopause, at least now I know that like, okay, it might be really difficult and I can kind of discern that maybe what I'm experiencing is from that. But 2 years ago, I had no clue. I just thought my brain that there was something wrong with me and I couldn't figure it out. And I would try to eat well and drink and rest and all of that. No amount of rest helped me. Like for me with that brain fog, no amount of rest helped me at all. So how do we view this phase of life? I guess how do we view it without fearing it? And maybe knowing that there is an element of mourning that comes with it, but that there's nothing to be scared of. Or I don't know. I feel like that's not even a coaching question. That's more of like a coach as therapist kind of question, right?
I feel like I am a therapist in a lot of ways. But, it's because I've needed a lot of therapy through this. So, and that's come from, my run groups, or I do have a phenomenal therapist who I haven't seen in a long time, but I love her. And I relate to her on so many levels because she is a runner and she's had a hysterectomy and she couldn't have her own baby. So when I go in there and go, oh my God, like this is where she's like, girl, I know.
Yeah.
But you can be faster as a master if you change your approach. And I don't mean just changing your training approach. I mean, changing your mindset approach too. Like you have to change your mindset. You have to change your self-talk, your limiting beliefs. You have to let go of those. I love Kipchoge because he says no human is limited, and he is so right. You can unlock a lot of your potential with your mind. Now, you do also need to be open to pulling back, making changes, focusing on strength in a season, focusing on nutrition in a season, like working on your weaknesses. And this is something that I talk to my athletes about all the time because they want to go after one goal after another and they just keep getting bigger.
Wait. Yes. Okay, please, because you posted something. Oh, God, I just got so excited. If you watch this video on YouTube, you're going to see me get super, super, super excited because you posted something recently to this point. And I was just like, yes, that not every race or not every season should be that PR. Okay, so I'm going to quiet because I want to hear what you have to say. But I got excited.
Feel like we go into, like, once we finally give in and define ourselves as runners and we give ourselves permission to go after these huge goals, they just keep getting bigger and longer distances. And we go from, I went from 5K to 10K to half marathon. I skipped the 15. I was like, nope, let's go bigger. Now, I've not gone beyond a marathon, but I train a lot of trail runners, ultra athletes, and oh my God, I'm like, you really want to go run another 100-miler? Like, what is wrong with you? I'm like, could we please take one training cycle to do 5Ks? And they're like, no, more. And we don't need to always go after huge goals one after another. This is where periodizing your training is so helpful. Because if you want to be able to continue to do those super long races or go after big goals, you've got to be really self-disciplined and letting go of some of that FOMO of what everybody else is doing. Yeah, we're consuming everybody else's content left and right. We've got thousands of people popping up in our feeds, and it seems like they're all going after these huge goals. And then there's me, I'm like, I'm going into some 10-mile weeks and I'm super excited about it.
Yeah. It is.
Because it brings back your love of running. And that's, for me, I'd rather have a 25-minute PR than I would rather run 3,000 miles in a year.
Yeah, listen. Okay, so again, as a younger runner, and now I feel I'm going to look back at my younger self with so much more kindness because you gifted me an understanding that I did not have, was that when I was younger, I had more hormones going through my body, which made recovery possible. So I think back to the year 2016. Okay, this is the year 2016. For whatever reason, that year, I wanted to do a run streak and I
Oh
wanted to
gosh.
run the miles. Okay. In
Mm-hmm.
my mind, it was I'm going to run every single day in 2016 and I want to run 2016 miles.
Yes.
And that's a year where I think I did 2 marathons. It was either 2 or 3 marathons. I don't even remember. I remember doing the Chicago Marathon and then the following day going out and running like a mile or something.
Yes.
Looking back, I don't know. I mean, I know why I did it because I was young and
You
silly and I
could.
was excited about the sport. Now I'm like, no way, like that won't ever happen. But I think it's also, again, for me, looking back, I've had those moments where I just wish I could go back to her. And even now, myself, like I always say it, and I'm sure people will disagree with me on this one, but it's like for me, PRs are informative, but they're like, if it's from more than a year ago, I'm like, I don't even want to hear about it because so much has changed in your life. So for me, it's like, oh yeah, my PR in the marathon happened to be in 2016. And I look at that and I'm like, I don't even consider that a PR. Like, yes, it is a PR, technically speaking, but I'm like, but that was a totally different human. That was a completely different person, age-wise, life stress-wise. I can't look at her and put myself on par with her when so much has changed. And I just love what you had posted and what you said because I think what you're trying to encourage people is to be in the season that they're in,
Yes.
but then also and I feel like curiosity is such an important thing for you that it's not only be in the season that you're in, but be curious as to how you can be in that season differently. Because
Yes.
if not, we get stuck in this autopilot of running next race, next race, next race, next race, that I feel like we start to miss the point of
Mm-hmm.
running, maybe. And I say it for myself because I was there where I was like, next race, next race, next race. And then it became about the numbers and
Yes.
about the miles and I lost. I mean, I burnt out. That is how I can tell you 2017 was the year that I burnt out of running. I didn't understand why I was still doing it. It was like, why am I still doing this? If it like I feel so burnt out by it. And it was because of that, because I had strayed from that initial curiosity of like, ooh, what can I do? And you can do so much with a 5K training block, just like you can do a lot with that 100
Oh my
mile
gosh.
training,
It's
right?
so funny how we become like these 5K snobs. And I was one of them for sure. Like once I got into half marathons, I'm like, the 5K is my warm up, whatever. I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to go pay to run a 5K in my town when I can do it for free on the treadmill every morning. But if you change that perspective to what if I actually learned how to race the 5K? What if I learned how to get faster in the 5K? What if? I think that can be a really good question instead of like, well, what would, what's the worst that could happen? What if I gave this a chance? And so I
Mm.
came out of Wilmington Marathon this last February with a 25-minute PR in my 6th marathon. And that's not very common, to be perfectly honest,
That's a big
especially
one.
as a woman in surgical menopause. Like, I want to show other women it can be done if you want it. It doesn't have to be your goal. You can go out and run for fun. You can go out and do run streaks. You can do what you want to do if your goal is to just do that. If your goal is to run 3,000 miles this year, when you go out and run that 6th marathon this year, don't come away from it going, no PR this time, and be upset
Yes.
about it. That wasn't your goal. My goal was breakthroughs last year, and I broke through every distance PR except for the 5Ks because I didn't really race a 5K to test it. But I broke through my 10 and 15K the week before I broke through my marathon. But it was because it was very strategic in how I approached it. And it's because I spent a year going through maintenance and developing some training plans for others to do the same thing if they want to do it. But I think you have to define those goals differently. Your PRs can be climbing a hill without like stopping and walking. It can be to run a specific route stronger or happier, or it can be going out and running with a group of friends because you've been so intimidated to do it.
I just adore that, because you're asking us and inviting us to be more expansive of our use of the word PR, right? Because when you hear PR or words PR, when you hear that, you're thinking time. And what you're saying is, no, a PR can be an experience. It can be that emotional sensation. And again, that's something that, okay, my time PR is from 2016, but my emotional PR is probably my 2021 Chicago Marathon. And when we're talking about like marathon distance in specific, because my relationship to the marathon distance totally shifted during that race. I had so much fun. I've never had as much fun as I did on a marathon course as I did on that one. And I love that because it's such an important invitation, especially as we go through seasons of running. And I try to tell people all the time, I'm like, no, running, you have your highs, you have your lows, and unfortunately, you have plateaus. Like there's going to be periods of time where not much is happening, where you feel like you're putting in the work, but it's not necessarily, you're not seeing it in a time result, because if we limit ourselves to time results, I mean, we are limiting ourselves.
Yes.
I have a question then. So how does training differ between a menopausal athlete and a non-menopausal athlete? Is there any training differences that happen there, or is it kind of the same? Okay, you're like, yeah, okay, what is it?
It's similar in a lot of ways, but I train all of my athletes in a similar way, because as a menopausal athlete, strength does become really important for a list of reasons, but like, you know, your bone density, your strength overall, protecting you against injury. Those are all important things for younger athletes as well, or for my male athletes, because I've got male athletes on my roster. I don't just train women, I train men as well. Polarizing your training is really, really important. And for me, what that means is having at least 2 days between hard sessions. So a hard session is either speed work or it's a good, like full body workout, lifting heavy. I will either stack my hard days, my speed and strength together, or they are sandwiched together. And then you've got mobility, you've got super chill, easy miles, you've got a rest day before you go into a long run, which is also a hard day.
Yeah.
Your stresses in running aren't just running fast. They're speed works, they are strength, they are the way that you stack your week, they are your overall mileage, they're your monthly mileage. There's so many different variations of stresses. There's travel stress, there's family stress, life stress, like life be lifing.
Yeah. Yes.
I posted about that recently. Like we had a day where something completely random happened, threw off my entire day. And my stress level throughout the day was much higher than had I gone and done my strength training. So I skipped it. I was like, my mental capacity is at 0 now. I need to chill. And that was more important than going and getting that workout in or making it up the next day. It's all about understanding when you need to push and when you need to pull back. So strength training is huge in menopause. The way that the week is structured, the month is structured is really important. And then nutrition is also on top of that. Like you said, I would say that weight gain for menopausal athletes is probably number 1 on the list. Like everybody fights with it. That's all I see in the menopause group. They try to shut down the conversation, but that's what we're struggling with. I mean, I packed on 25 pounds, and it's not that I've ever been morbidly obese, or if anybody would even look at me at my highest and go, yeah, you're overweight.
Right.
You know, they look at me and go, oh, please, like, you know what a problem is. But my health markers were trending in the wrong direction. I was almost hypertensive. I was creeping up on diabetes, things that my family has had a problem with and I want no part of.
Yeah.
I want to be able to feel as good as I can, as long as I can. And so for me, that meant learning nutrition and why protein is so important for menopausal athletes, why lifting heavy is so important. Like, all of this is something you should be doing anyways, but it becomes really important in menopause.
So I feel like, and I'm going to give myself as an example here, and you tell me if I'm kind of on the right track. I'm being selfish here. This is a question for me. Whereas I feel like when I was younger, I got more out of running through higher mileage. Whereas now, as I'm older, I feel like I get more out of running through lower mileage, but more strength. That's where I feel like when I was younger, it was high mileage, maybe a strength workout here, there. I did yoga. So I feel like the script has been changed for me now, where when I was younger, I mean, I was doing, and like you said, I feel like I trained like an athlete. I wasn't an athlete. I was out there for hours. But I remember in one of my marathon builds, I was running 55 to 60 miles a week. Okay. Mm-hmm. Now I'm like, hell no, I'm never going to run that much again. I'm good at like 40, 45.
Yeah.
Is that usually what you see with older athletes, that it kind of flips, that where I feel like there's a point of diminishing returns with running more miles the older you get?
Yes. I would say you're absolutely right. And again, you could get away with a lot when you were younger. Now, when you were younger, you had all the hormones, your metabolism was through the roof. You could do all the miles and it not be a problem and recover like that. Recovery does take longer when you are older, but you didn't have kids. You didn't have like a high stress job, or you didn't have a spouse. You weren't remodeling a house.
Right. Yeah.
So you didn't have all these other extra stressors. I mean, when we're young, our world is very small. We really have very little stress, even though it seems like we just have all the stress in the world. But the script does need to be flipped when you're an older athlete or in menopause. Like I said, there's no age there. So you need to start putting that focus in quality over quantity, because if you keep chasing the quantity, you're going to be really discouraged. You're going to be injured. You're going to be fatigued. You're going to be missing workouts. You're not going to be able to get through it.
Yeah, I'm all about doing the minimum amount that I have to do to have the maximum effect. Yeah. That's kind of where I'm at right now, where it's like, I don't want to be running longer than I need to run. Like, yeah, I may ask for, which I did in the marathon training cycle. I was like, I want to run a 22 miler, and I know it's going to do absolutely nothing for me physically, but mentally I needed it. And when I did that, I felt it was hard, but I spent the last 3 miles laughing at myself, because I'm like, but no one told you to do this. Like, you're asking for it. But I got the mental benefit out of it, which is what I wanted. And but even then with that, I'm like, no, I don't. I just think back to how I trained when I was younger, and it was very, very intense. And now, like you said, I don't have the capacity. I have to do my run, come home, and then be mom and be everything else and do everything else. And I just don't, it's very different now.
I think that runners have that mindset from the start. We're told that if you want to run faster, you need to run more. And while that's true to some degree, you can have those big breakthroughs running 4 days a week, not 6. And that's kind of like my problem with all of the free training plans out there. I laughed because we had a community call recently for my coaching platform, or my coaching group. And so one of my fellow coaches said, somebody needs to retire Hal. Like, Hal Higdon's plans, while they can be really, really beneficial, they are not the plans for menopausal athletes. And so when somebody comes to me and says, Oh my gosh, the cumulative fatigue. I am on board with that principle and I understand it, but his plans have no speed work. They have no real clear direction on strength training. It just says cross training, and cross training for me, I define it as non-impact. Strength training is its own thing. Like, I think they're two different things. So there needs to be better resources out there. And that's what I have created in my training plans, whether they are pre-designed or they're custom for the athlete. They include all the things. I love mobility. I love yoga. For me, I think it complements my running really well, not only physically, but that mental meditative side of yoga is, some days I'm like, I don't have the capacity for this. I need a good, long, stretchy yoga session. I need to slow down. And that's what I try to teach my athletes, is that quality over quantity, regardless of their age, because if they adopt these principles at a younger age, they can transition through this phase of life very easily.
Yeah. And I also I want to point out, I always want to just shout out this thing of like how, or any of these pre-made plans, especially if there's, it's the same thing like with Hanson's, right? Like these people that have been around for a while. I just want to just always highlight that they're men making plans based on other men's training, not always taking in the woman or like just female physiology into these training plans.
Honestly, that's the problem with like everything. Intermittent fasting was made for men. It's honestly not super great for women. And it's not anything I ever advocate for an athlete.
No.
When we were younger, we could get away with fasted runs. And now I'm like, no, I want to be fed. I want to be fueled.
Oh yeah. No. Yes, give me the food before, during, and after. I just wanted to point that out because I feel like people will go and they'll find these plans online, and it's great. There's a lot of free resources. All I can do is encourage people to just be really discerning and to kind of question the plan that you're getting. And in terms of, is this something that actually makes sense for me, the type of athlete I am, and the lifestyle that I have? So just, y'all keep that in mind.
Yes.
I have two final questions for you. One is, why should people who don't experience menopause care about menopause? Because I feel like us women can talk about it all the time, or us in female bodies can talk about it all the time. But if the men in the room don't care, I feel like we get screwed on so many levels, right? Because then it's like the men are the ones that control research funds and all this other stuff. So in your opinion, why is it important for people who don't experience menopause or won't ever go through menopause to care about it?
Well, because they likely have a spouse or a mom or a sister or a daughter who's going to go through it. And they honestly need to be just as educated as we are, because they're going to deal with the repercussions of menopause just like we are. I can tell you that my husband was no more prepared for menopause than I was. And he always jokes that if there needs to be a support group for the husbands of menopause, that he will be the leader. The poor man, he got a double dose of it too. So it wasn't just me. But aside from that, I tend to think about non-binary or transgender people who, whether they understand it or not, they're going to deal with some cognitive issues in this phase of life as well. Hormones can be controlled to some degree to get us to the place where we want to be, but they're not that end all be all. And again, like, as we are curious and experiment with hormonal balances, we see some shifts. I recently increased my progesterone because I don't sleep through the night, even with a wonderful cocktail of melatonin and CBD. I just was like, for the love of God, could I get at least a week of uninterrupted sleep? That would be wonderful.
Yeah.
Well, with it came some anxiety and depression, and I couldn't dig myself out of it. And I was really struggling. And my husband was like, I would like to have my wife back. So I luckily was able to recognize it very quickly and send my doctor a message and go, hold on, we need to back off. Like, can you please call the pharmacy and fix this? I have a blood draw next week. I see you in a month, but I'm not going to last this month. Like
Yeah.
something needs. So regardless of what body you're in, your hormones, they're going to do some things to you that you aren't going to be able to control very easily. And so I think it's important to understand the things that you can control and the things that you need to work hand in hand with a really amazing hormone doctor who will help you navigate these things. There's so much more to it cognitively than I could even dive into. There's some things that we can't get to very easily, especially in surgical menopause. There's things that I have been trying to correct or find balance with for 7 years, and I still can't get to them, but I keep searching for ways. And that means I'm really open to like energy healing and outside of the box things, and really working on meditation, self-talk, self-image, all the things. But I think it's really important that when we are not able to get to that ourselves, we can explain that to our partners and why we're not showing up in the way that they want us to show up.
Yeah. I remember reading, you know how it's like once you start learning about something, all the information starts to pop up.
Yes.
And there was
what is it, that reticular activating system or whatever?
Yeah. And that was something that had come up. It was an interview. I listened to an interview. It was a couple, and they were talking about how the woman spoke about how when she was going through menopause, that she felt like she became another person, and her husband almost got a divorce. And what helped them out is that they went to counseling. They went to couples counseling and were able to just talk through everything that was going on. And I heard that and I just thought, oh, okay, this is not, I got my period and like not smooth because it's not smooth,
No.
but it sounds like the getting your period is such a smoother transition than that point. And again, like I said, I look at my husband and there are moments where I feel bad for him, because it feels, even for myself, kind of scary to be like, oh, who am I going to become? Like, I am someone right now at 39 years old. I'm incredibly irritable when I'm hot. Yes. I cannot imagine the demon that I will probably become if I experience heat flashes, because right now I'm like, I don't want anyone touching me. I don't want anyone looking at me. If I'm hot, like, please give me, like, my personal bubble expands. So so that's,
I laugh because I get it.
and I'm like, and that's now, right? Like, that's now. And who knows how the hormones are going to play. And from my understanding with heat flashes, they can come up at any time. Like, there's
no controlling, like, there's no great way to explain them, but like, you're burning up from the inside out and they're so intense and you're like, holy mother of God. Like, when I went through it in temporary menopause, I would be getting my nails done. I'm like, hold on, turn on the little bitty fan, please. And alcohol makes it worse. So things that you have to learn about managing those symptoms may not make you very happy, but
but it seems like the whole communication around it helps, because even to what you were sharing earlier about finding out that, oh, you're not the only one. And I think that's a big part where I feel like so much of the stages that women go through are shrouded in mystery. And by shrouded in mystery, I mean it more like, oh, we should always just smile. And I experienced that with my eldest daughter. When she was born, everyone told me, oh, you have a baby, you should be happy. You have a baby, you should be happy. And I was not happy. I was
not. Happens when you don't feel that way? Like, you feel guilty or shame around your feelings, and
so much shame.
Yeah, I felt extremely uncomfortable and vulnerable going through endometriosis. I went through it for 6 years and I didn't speak to my general population of friends and family about it. There were a handful of people who knew what I was going through, but I didn't speak to it. Like I would vague book about it a little bit because I had feelings, but
Right.
it wasn't until after the hysterectomy, after I really had kind of got thrown into all of these symptoms, that I was like, okay, I feel alone and I can't be the only one who's going through this. And if I don't speak up, how does anyone have any help? How do we not feel so alone? I mean, being married to a nurse, I felt like maybe he would understand me better, but I felt super alone with my husband. He obviously is a dude and cares about sex far more than I do.
Right.
Especially being in menopause and not have, I mean, I've never had a super high sex drive, but let me tell you, it didn't get any higher in menopause. So even the other day, I said, I'm struggling and I am thinking about reaching out to my doctor because I think I've pinpointed the problem. And he's like, could you ask him for a pill that would help with that? And I'm like, I might murder you right now. But it took, I mean, even though he went through all of this with me, he
Yeah.
didn't understand it on the same level. Being a nurse, understanding the biology of the body, it took him 7 years to look at me and go, oh, it's like if I were castrated. And I looked at him and I said, I was castrated. Like
Yeah.
that is what happened to me. And it's not like it would be the same for you, but it is what happened. And so there's no there's no changing this. This is where I'm at. All I can do is manage it the best of my ability every day. But even a medical professional didn't understand it. So I felt super, super alone.
I think thank you for sharing that, because I know that's, again, even for me, similar situation, but different situation, but similar feelings of the same thing. Like I gave birth to my kids and yes, he was there and it still felt very, very lonely. Like I always say with, and my oldest daughter, because that's the one that made me a mother, like she was the first one where I'm like, I didn't like her for the
Yeah.
first 9 months of life. I did not like her. And I did everything because that's what was expected of me, because I loved her enough to know that I needed to do the things to keep her alive, but I
Yeah.
did not like her. And that was something that I don't think my husband ever really understood. And he even like maybe a year ago, where we were talking about something like paternity leave, and he's like, no, because he wasn't able to take any kind of time off after
Yeah.
both of our daughters' birth. And he's like, no, because then people at work would have said this or that about me. And I'm like, yeah, well, how about your wife who was struggling at home with her mental health? Like,
Yeah.
I think it would have been, I think you getting made fun of for a few days would have been worth my mental sanity during that time. So I feel like there is such a big disconnect of how even you can share a life with someone and still not know the inner workings of their experience with life. So thank you for sharing that. It's complicated. It's
It
complicated, but
is. It really is. That's why I speak to so much of it. And, running can help. I just did this post because it's mental health awareness, and running can be a form of therapy. It is not a replacement for therapy, but it can be really helpful. And I can see where it has propelled me forward through life and literally kept me alive. Like there's been times that I've thought to myself, like, I'm not going to kill myself, but I'm not necessarily interested in living this way anymore. Like it's just that uncomfortable of a place to be in, when like nothing brings you joy and everybody's like,
yeah.
oh, well, just be grateful for this. And I'm like, it's really hard to find gratitude today.
Well, and it's hard to find gratitude when chemically you don't have the capacity to do it,
Yeah.
right? Like that was something that was very eye-opening for me, where again, we talk about depression a lot, or society talks about depression a lot. And there was for a long time, and I think even still, it's the choose to be happy. And I
Yeah.
read this research paper that was like, people can't choose it if chemically they're not able to. Like there
Right.
is a chemical balance in your body that needs to happen in order for you to even see that happiness is a choice. And that blew me away, completely changed my perspective. Up until that point, I was one of those, again, hashtag choose happy. Now I'm like, nope, I don't do any of that. Like there's none of that, because there is a whole chemical underbelly to our experience that we don't realize it when everything feels good. But when something feels off, that's when we're like, huh, okay, something's off. What's going on here? So I just appreciate your honesty with all of that, because I feel like, again, we can share, and maybe it's similar to you, where some of the loneliest moments I've ever experienced have been those moments when I am surrounded by people who love me and support me.
Yeah.
But
It's,
there's
I mean, that's not always enough. Like,
yeah,
it doesn't get to the root of the problem. And this is something that I tell my athletes when they're struggling. I'm like, I want you to feel your feelings and move through them so that they don't become stuck and become a barrier for you. But there's a certain amount of looking on the bright side of things, or knowing that it's temporary and you're going to move through this season for the most part. And it's going to be better on the other side, but you need to be able to process those feelings along the way, or at least have somebody to go, hey, I know it's hard and you're not alone.
Yeah, those are my favorite people, are the ones that are like, I'm not going to give you advice. I'm just going to validate that it sucks. Like,
like
I always say it, I'm like, just let me have my pity party. Like, come sit with me in this pity party. Don't try to take me out of it. Let's just sit in the pity party. And then, eventually I'll know when it's time to go, or you'll nudge me and say, hey, Steph, we've been in this party for a little bit too long. It's time to go. Because I think that's also like a greater issue with our society, is that we always want to fix. And it's like, sometimes it's not about fixing. It's just about sitting with and being with it.
Definitely. I am a fixer in a lot of ways.
Hard.
And I think that's why I'm great as a coach, but I am learning how to go, okay, you just need to be heard, or you need to vent, or you need to let me know what's going on. And I don't need to fix you. I can offer you some options. I did that with one of my athletes this last week. She's perimenopausal and she's a nurse. So she understands this, but that doesn't change her feelings on things.
Right.
And so she's like, okay, sleep is really a struggle right now. And when she's 3 on, like, there's certain things that she can't take because she needs to be up and alert and not groggy for work. And so I'm like, okay, here's some of the things I've tried or I've heard about. And she's like, yep, tried all those. But I've got a doctor's appointment this weekend. I'm like, okay, let me know how it goes. Like, let me know what they suggest and let me know when you're not okay, and we will adjust and adapt. Like, she just needed me to know why she wasn't showing up in her training.
Right. And that's it, right? Like, it's just that being heard is so important.
Yeah.
All right. Final question. You've answered this before, but now I'm curious to see if there's a different answer. How can we make running more accessible and inclusive?
We got to speak about it. We've got to speak about our experiences. This is something that you'll see in, my Instagram posts and my stories. I am a Native American woman. I have my own unique set of perspectives on things. And being silenced is not an option. So I speak about them, but I try to speak to the things that are going right instead of like trauma bonding with others, because I firmly believe that the energy that you're putting out there is what's coming back. And I want to put the good energy out there and what's going right and what's changing. But the running world is a very non-inclusive space overall. And it takes people like me going, hey, I look different than you, but I love this too.
Yeah, I love that, because I know I struggle with that in particular sometimes, oftentimes, of I don't want to post. Why do I want to post? Like, and then I have to remind myself, I'm like, no, but remember, you post so that people can see that, hey, that this little tiny little Latin woman from Miami, Florida, she runs. And if she does it, like, you can do it too. That sometimes it is a little bit bigger than us, but it is hard. It is hard to want to maintain that motivation. I see it again. Like, I think of it often with social media, that a lot of the biggest accounts, a lot of the biggest accounts, and I follow a lot of them. They do not look anything like me. And
No.
it's cool to follow their journeys, but at the same time, again, it's that discernment of like, okay, what is this doing for me? Am I seeing myself represented there? No. And if I'm not, and I feel like in our last conversation, you were the one that said, like, if it's not there, then create it. Something along those lines.
Yeah, I mean, that's what I had to do in this space. We wouldn't be sitting here talking if I were not vulnerable and spoke to my experience about endometriosis, about running, about menopause, about being a Native woman. So representation matters. And I think that's really important. I just told one of my mentees about that the other day. I have a couple mentees through our Game Changers program. And she came to me and she's like, I went to this event and there was nobody there like me. And I'm like, okay, so when you go to these spaces and these events, or you don't see yourself included, how can you show others that you're there so that they will come too? How can you represent who you want there? Rather than looking at a situation and going, it's too white, and calling it too white, can you say, okay, how can I bring some diversity to this? How can I speak to it so that people are aware and it's not super abrasive? I do that also with menopause. I did a post the other day speaking about the resources for menopausal athletes, because they're not inclusive for surgical menopause. They have a clear bias. And I speak about it because there's women like me who need the help, and they're not going to get it from these resources. And someone spoke up and told me I needed to stop shitting on all of these very smart doctors and just stay in my lane. And I was like, oh no, honey, this is information. It was not opinion. And there was a reason that I spoke to it, because there's women like me who are not getting the resource that they need.
Or how about the women who are facing the same choice you had to make?
Yes.
Not even the women who are where you are, but the women who are where you were 7, 8, 9, 10 years ago, right?
Yeah.
Like those women who are trying to understand what the future is going to look like for them if they get the hysterectomy, right? Like that is high, that's a population of people who maybe feel invisible right now because there isn't someone like you that's saying, hey, this is the experience and it sucks, but I'm here to show you that there is a path forward, that you can find happiness, acceptance, empowerment through the process. And I say those words because that's what I get from you, of like, no, this was my experience and I'm here making the best of it. And then I'm turning it around and teaching you about it so that you can make the best of it for yourself as well. So to me, listen, we live on a planet with over 8 billion people. There's room for everyone's opinion. There is room for everyone's, like, I just think of it of like, if I see something I don't like, I'm not going to comment that I don't like it. I'm just going to unfollow, or I'm just not going to be there. Like, you do you.
That's me too. But when these people come to me, I mean, if they just make a blatant, ridiculous, hateful statement that has nothing to do with anything, then I will hide their comments or I'll delete them or whatever. I'll block them. But in this case, we had a short dialogue and it was shut down very quickly because I said, listen, this is my experience. This is not, or it wasn't even experience. This is information. This is not opinion. And just because it's not your experience doesn't mean that it's not valuable.
Right. Oh, I was so close. My internet was doing so well. Can you see me? Oh, hello. Always. The internet just drives me crazy. It drives me crazy. I'm like, no, we were doing so well here. And I think it's because the weather is starting to turn in Miami. So frustrating. Okay, I don't want to push it too much here. Tell me tell us a little bit about your Menopausal Marathoner Guide, and then how else we can support you, celebrate you, follow along, and learn from you and about you.
Awesome. So I have created the resource that I couldn't find. It's putting a lot of the pieces together for menopausal athletes. Now, you don't necessarily have to be a marathoner to benefit from this guide. It is a very comprehensive guide on navigating this stage of life and training so that you can make the most of it. I do have some really great pre-designed training plans that are available, coaching options. I've only got one more spot on my roster currently. So I'm getting ready to go race a 10K. I'm excited about it. And then, like I said, I'm super excited about going into maintenance, but you can find me on Instagram or Facebook at coach.croft. There's links to my website for those resources or options. I'm always happy to have conversations, whether somebody just needs an ear, they just need to know they're not crazy, or if they are looking to see if I would be a good fit for them as a coach.
I love that. I love that. I love you. I love what you stand for. And I love how you make these complex, like I still think of you from our first conversation. You're like, I'm sassy. And I'm like, yes, you are. And I love it because you're like, this is what it is.
Yeah.
This is what it is.
I'm not sugarcoating it. Like,
exactly.
Ovaries are not going to save you from menopause and hysterectomy. Like, I'm going to tell it how it is. But that, I think, connects me to the people who are going through this or that need some resources or help. So if I don't, nobody else is.
Right. I mean, I listen to you talk about all of this, and I think of, again, myself, just looking at that life phase and being like a little bit worried, but I look to you and I'm like, well, your honesty makes it feel like it's manageable.
Yeah, it is. It really is. And having someone that you can come to is really helpful. It's not a stage of life to be fearful of. It's not something that we need to continue to have a stigma around. We need to have these conversations, and we need to understand that the people who have different experiences in this still have value to add to the conversation.
I'm going to leave it at that. I'm going to leave it at that. Thank you, everyone, for listening to this episode, and for, of course, my internet was like, hey, let's just kind of crash for a second there. So thank you, Becky, for hanging tight on that. Everyone, thank you for listening. If you've got any other questions or you want to chat some more, reach out to Coach Croft on Instagram or Facebook, and just thank you for being you and for showing up in all your curiosity and in all your fullness to what is kind of a complicated, and even as you said, you're like, there's no need to fear. I'm like, there is no need to fear, but because we don't talk about it, the unknown makes it scary.
It does. Well, thank you for allowing me to add my voice to the conversation and put it out there for people who need it. I really appreciate it. I always really enjoy chatting with you.
Yay! All right, everyone. Until next time, see you soon. Bye.
Bye.